and then it was eerily quiet, and then my mind was kind of like, the head in the fishbowl.
Then it takes me into the bathroom and says, this is how you brush your teeth. Brush, rinse, repeat. Brush, rinse, repeat. Brush, rinse, repeat.
But there were two girls, and it was like, you'll have to give us a ride. You can't tell us no. You can't refuse us. He'll let us in his car.
Thoughts were all alone in this empty void, the head in the fishbowl.
This doesn't look right. They got close enough where he said he could see, their eyes and how intelligent they seem. This doesn't look right. These gremlin-type creatures. This doesn't look right. No pupils, no iris, 3 fingers, 3 long fingers. And this is when the mental torture.
And then it was eerily quiet.
And Rob's mouth is dead.
Sad and tragic.
Very sad.
It's just out of batteries. It's wireless.
Oh.
It's not that tragic.
Well, then it'll come back to life.
Yeah, we'll revive it.
Luke.
Yo.
What you drinking today?
Just tea. I had enough to drink last night, so
What
I'm taking it
in
easy.
the world, man? How?
I'm taking it. He's Debo is sitting beside me right now. He's gonna
The silent partner.
he's gonna take care of the drinking side of things.
All right. Yeah, he's drinking enough for both of you tonight.
Exactly.
I don't know. That's a lot, though. You'll die if you drink enough for Luke, to yourself and for Luke. I'll be worried about this poor guy over here. So, Luke, I understand that you won a very prestigious award.
I did, man. Actually, everyone's gonna make fun of me, but it's the first trophy.
No, not at all.
It's the first trophy that I've ever won. Actually, I got a participation trophy in softball when I was a kid. But I had the highest hot chicken sales in our restaurant.
Yeah,
I'm not
man.
gonna say what restaurant it is, but
How did they determine the highest hot chicken sales?
just they have all of that, detailed records of everything that takes place, all the transactions and everything, and
I didn't know you did cash register, though.
I don't, but they're just it
You're
was how much
definitely
this-
over there frying that chicken, though. I know that.
Exactly. It's me cooking it, but they just determined that because how many had been rang up, which restaurant sold the most. And then all the fry boys got congratulated or whatever, but I was working the most hours, so therefore, the trophy, I really earned the trophy.
Oh.
Because I'm almost 40 hours a week, and the other fry guys have
The other fry guys.
25 hours or something.
That always makes me think of those dancing pom-poms that were the Hamburglers fry guys. Little jumping things.
Yeah, I've been waiting my whole life for this moment to get this trophy, man. I'm tearing up, man. I'm getting emotional.
Man. Did they when you got it? Did they throw a bunch of Gatorade on you? You say, "Where are you gonna go?" I'm going to Disney World.
I got a Subway card for $15.
Oh man!
And I hate Subway too.
Oh.
I just gave it to Booty.
Here you go. Booty is his girlfriend. Yes, ladies, he calls his girlfriend Booty.
Well, I gotta use.
He has a very special song about her too.
We're not gonna talk about that, man. That's still in the works.
Well, Rob, despite your mouse dying, how have you been?
Good, man. I had the weirdest experience on the ride home today.
Really?
Yeah. Well, throughout the day, I kept getting a phone call from this Nashville number, and I was working, so I didn't know who it was. Figured they'd leave a voicemail if it was important, but they didn't. But also at the same time, I was like, well, I have kind of been waiting for a couple of calls, so I had a break, and I called the number back, and it went to voicemail. So okay, great, whatever. But then I got off work and I was driving home, and I got a random text from this number that says, "Hey, this is Mark. Sorry, I've been in the shop all day." I was like, okay. So what's up? And he was like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "What's going on?" Why? He's like, "Well, I missed 3 phone calls from you today. I just wanted to see what you wanted." I was like, wait a minute. So I looked at the number on the text, and then I pulled up my phone history, and it was the same number that had called me 3 times. I was like, "No, I missed 3 phone calls from you today." And he was like, no, I missed 3 phone calls from you today, and I have a voicemail from you. I was like, what the hell? So I was just gonna ignore it. And
All right.
and then he texted me back this picture of his missed calls and stuff. and there's like 3 missed calls from someone named Rosie. And I was like, okay, I don't see my phone number anywhere on there, dude. And he was like, you don't see Rosie on there anywhere, really? I was like, I'm not Rosie.
That's Rob. That's Rob on Monday nights.
Rob on weekends.
So then the guy calls me again. I answered, and he's like, hey man, seriously, where's Rosie? I was like, this is Rob. This is my phone. This has been my phone number for like 8 years. I don't know who Rosie is.
Rosie's my bitch now.
Your phone shows that you missed 3 phone calls from a Rosie. Like, I don't understand how you could get my number with the name Rosie in your phone, and then I don't know. It's just bizarre.
Oh.
I still don't understand how it happened. Like,
Oh, could it be that Rosie gave a fake phone number and it just so happened to
it
be
showed
yours?
the 3 missed phone calls on his phone from somebody named Rosie.
Oh.
But when he clicks that, it calls me.
You think it's possible that another phone carrier like used your number and like a duplicated number? Is that possible?
Something weird like that's happening.
That's possible.
But I've been getting a lot of weird phone calls.
Well, you know,
the
they
past 2
have
days.
that. They have those apps that people can use. And I heard about this. It's like it's like one's called second phone number. And people can actually, it'll generate a number. And you can actually use that as another phone number if you don't want to give anybody your actual phone number.
Yeah.
So the app makes the number.
So
I don't know how it would actually randomly. It doesn't make sense that it would actually randomly pick anybody's number that would already be existing.
Yeah, but
there
there's
are
so many numbers
there
out
are
there.
things like that out there.
I had to do that for Facebook because remember, or I didn't tell the audience, but like, they were spying on me. They locked me out of my account because I refused to give them a form of identification that shows my name on it. So I made another Facebook profile and just like generated a phone number and everything.
Yeah. Well, they wanted you, and they also wanted you to send them your birth certificate.
Yeah. So,
Do you remember that?
It said that was just part of one of the forms of identification. They said like ID or birth certificate or whatever.
Why in the world would anybody do that? Why would anybody send that to someplace like Facebook? Like Facebook is anything official in any capacity.
Yeah, a recreational site, like meant for you to just go there and look at pictures and memes and
or is it
waste
gonna?
time.
Well, is it gonna become like your social security number? Do you remember how your social security number when they first? Well, nobody actually physically in here remembers this, but in the 1930s when they came out with the social security number, they said, "Well, this is just your social security number, so you can get your benefits, and it's never going to be used in any other capacity. Not going to be used for identification purposes." Now, 80 years later, everywhere you go, you have to use your social
now it's your
security number.
UPC.
Right, yeah. Think about everything that you use now, all these websites that will allow you to log in through Facebook now. Because that's easy.
Yeah.
So like they
That's a
have
good
all your
point.
profiles. So is Facebook going to kind of become like that? It's like it's like those the Black Mirror episodes about like social media.
Stars. That
Yeah.
was creepy. Dude, I did read a report the other day though that
There was an Orville episode like that too.
Facebook usage is down. The average person is looking at Facebook about 2 minutes less a day than they were.
Good.
Really?
Which
Well-
2 minutes is not a lot for some people.
Well, you guys remember the great MySpace migration too,
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
yep.
and it's eventually going to happen again. Like
I'm surprised that it hasn't happened already, honestly.
Yeah, something less annoying that allows us to do all the things Facebook used to.
Because when Facebook started, it was just, it was mostly a lot of younger people. And now I've noticed that Facebook's mostly for people that are middle aged to older people now.
Oh yeah,
And so a lot of these other younger people are starting to go to like Snapchat and Instagram and all these things. Of course, Facebook owns Instagram, so they win either way, right? So, yeah, I know it's just weird how the technology has become so pervasive in our lives, and stuff like that. It's like they won't let people use. They won't let people use a nickname,
yeah,
but there's just a crap load of bots out there, fake bots that will steal people's information, and those hardly ever are getting shut down.
No, they do. They get cleaned out all the time, but
They just pop up just as fast.
yeah. They have all kinds of algorithms and everything that does search people's profile information to determine if they're real people or not, based on how many posts have been made and everything else.
Well, that's good, because those things are annoying.
Oh, yeah, I love those. The friend requests from like a person that only has one friend, and then they just started their account like last month. It's like,
Overly
and it's always a
overly
beautiful
buxom
woman.
female. Yeah. Do you remember somebody that we used to work with, Luke? I know Devin over here remembers this. This guy that we worked with that was actually talking to one of those bots. And he was talking about how he was talking to a porn star and all this stuff. And we're just sitting there just thinking, what the hell is he talking about? Talking to a porn star.
Oh, man.
And Luke finally figured out that he's talking to a bot. And like, you crushed his world when you told him that too. Just crazy. When people will fall, they will fall for this shit every single time. Because you could generally tell if it's like an overly attractive girl that you think, oh, that she don't want to have anything to do with me. And then down there is like everybody down there is like, these old lonely men, and then there's like maybe one like other kind of person. You're like, that's a bot. And most of the time it's people that I'm already friends with on Facebook. The one of those, I'm like, thanks, I know who to blame for this one. It's like they deliberately target people. What were you saying about 200,000 antelope?
Oh, yeah, I don't know. Let me pull that article back up. Yeah, I was just looking. I was breezing through the strange news articles, and there was this thing about how strange weather triggered bacteria that killed 200,000 endangered antelope, like in a matter of hours.
Where was this?
This was Kazakhstan.
Oh,
Kazakhstan.
Where Borat's from.
Kazakhstan is the greatest.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah. So apparently
And a little unsettling.
There's a bacteria that was already present in the animals, but when the weather got to just the right humidity and just the right warmth, the bacteria just kind of like exploded and went rampant. And these animals that were fine, like just grazing, eating normally, 3 hours later, they were just dead.
Wow.
Crazy that something like that could just happen to like a huge population.
No, that's some
God hit
nuts.
the exterminate button.
Yeah. Well, we've got for episode 199. Yes, we're getting much closer, and we may or may not have already done episode 200. It's kind of weird how that works out, but we've got Micah Hanks coming on, and he's going to be joined by Jason Pentrail and James Waldo, and all three of them have formed something called the 7 Ages Research Group. So we're going to talk to them about what they're hoping to do with this and some of their archaeological digs and all that good stuff. So, Luke, if you don't have anything to add, we'll go ahead and go to the interview.
I do have to fart, but it's going to be another minute or two.
All right. How unfortunate we're going to miss that. All right. We'll be right back, guys, on Conspirinormal. Welcome back, guys, to Conspirinormal. And for episode 199, I thought it would be good to have one of our favorite guests. But this time, he's actually brought two other guests with him. And that's Micah Hanks. Micah, welcome back to Conspirinormal.
Adam, good as always to be here, my brother. Been missing you guys. My
Absolutely,
brother,
man.
Nashville, yeah.
Absolutely. And we miss you too. But you have two other people with you that have never been on Conspirinormal before. And that's Jason Pentrail and James Waldo. and you guys have come up with something called the 7 Ages Research Group.
That's right.
And I'm excited to talk to you guys. Now, obviously, Micah, you and I, we go way back. You were like our 3rd or 4th guest on this show. But Jason and James, I have met Jason in person. James, I have not. But let's actually start with James, because I want to get kind of like you guys' background and kind of like how you got interested in what we're going to talk about tonight.
Well, thanks for having us on, Adam.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming.
Just the backstory of James Waldo.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, just, how you got interested in, because we're going to talk about archaeology a lot, and how you kind of got interested in that subject and kind of what you bring to the table in this triumvirate here.
Yeah. So, I'll just, start from the beginning. I was going to kind of make a joke about the airplane movie, how they said, the earth was formed and there was dinosaurs and then the Arabs came and they took all the oil, but we'll just start with me.
Sure.
So, I think I've always sort of had an interest in science. I've always kind of had this inquiring mind, but I have to say that as far as geology goes, years ago, when I was a private in the Army, I was stationed in Washington State up at Fort Lewis. And on the weekend, some friends of mine, we would go camping up in the Cascade Mountains. And I'm a Southerner, so I'm not used to seeing, these snow-capped peaks. So I thought it was the greatest thing ever. But one weekend we went out and saw Mount St. Helens, and it just left a lasting impression on me. So when eventually I got off of active duty and I went to college, I, decided to be a geology major, and here I am.
And so are you a geologist? Like, do you have a PhD in geology?
Professional geologist. I'm licensed to practice geology. So you can have a geology degree, but it's sort of like being a professional engineer or a lawyer who takes a bar test. There's the equivalent of the bar test for geologists that you take, and then you're licensed.
Gotcha. Okay. And Jason, kind of your background, what you kind of bring to the table.
Sure. Well, for me, an interest in archaeology is a lifelong thing. I always say, you have people who maybe get interested in archaeology after a college course or maybe watching a documentary on TV or something like that, and it kind of sparks their interest. And then there's the group of people who just have that interest from, as early as they can remember, and that was always me. So, grew up in a very historical area in Charleston, South Carolina. So there's, history always was around.
Oh, yeah.
All types of history, everything from Civil War, Revolutionary War, just, constantly surrounded by it. So my entire life, it was just kind of an interest of mine. And then it just grew and grew as I got older. Originally, I wanted to be an archaeologist, but after really looking into the money to be made in that career field and how difficult it could be sometimes, I kind of switched majors a little bit. So my education's in environmental science and environmental management, specializing mostly in marine environmental science. Also, different biological species, highly migratory species, sharks, tuna, bluefish, billfish, different things like that. So that's kind of where my background in education comes from. But as far as being an avocationalist archaeologist, that's truly my obsession. The peopling of America is my main interest out. So I have a big interest in Egyptology and other classical cultures. So that's kind of where I got to where I'm at, but it's always been with me since I was a child.
What brought you guys, and any of you guys can answer this question, but what brought you guys kind of specifically this interest in the archaeology of the Native Americans, that time period?
There are a lot of things that draw us collectively to that area of interest, to that period in time. And really, when we say collectively Native American studies, we can be looking at anything from more recent studies to the Archaic period, all the way back to Paleo-Indian and before this. Right now, we are in a period, I think, where not only in American history, but really worldwide, we are ever and truly constantly pushing the envelope in terms of our conception of early human migrations out of Africa into different parts of the world, into North America. We're looking at geological discoveries that are reshaping our notions of, again, very wide scale, worldwide uh, shifts, I think. And really, I'm trying to think of a term to use that isn't cataclysm, but really I think that word is the best for it because, again, one of the preeminent things right now that we are seeing, and in fact, within just the last few days, a new study that talks about this massive biomass burning that occurred around 12,008 to 12,900 years ago.
Right.
This, of course, directly coincides with the period, and I know that you know Randall Carlson. He talks about this a lot. The Younger Dryas period, which is really, truly, I think, climatologically, geologically, and otherwise, what we use as essentially the benchmark, the model for a rapid, sudden climate change in ancient times. This is something also that interests us, and this, of course, coincides with archaeologically in North America what we identify as the Clovis culture and a sharp decline in their presence, represented in the archaeology and other things as well. I know that I was interested and have been for a long time in the various theories about what exactly around that period, 12,900 years ago, what happened. And when Jason and I met, I would say, if anything, it was probably, Jason, our paleontological interests that we shared. He and I met in Charleston, South Carolina. Around that time, I'd been corresponding with James Waldo. And James and I, of course, also share, just as Jason and I do, and all of us here, I think, present, a variety of different areas and interdisciplinary interest in scientific analysis and things like this. And not just for the sake of being in mysteries. It's just a matter of really understanding that at the outset, all things that can be determinable and studied through science do have a mysterious quality. We are looking for answers, and really that's what science in part attempts to do. So we share an interest in things that remain unanswered by science. But again, for me, really it was this model for ancient sudden climate change represented by the Younger Dryas. Jason brought an archaeological component to that, which we began to really have. It began with, I think, he and I acknowledging we both had an interest in this thing. We set aside some time to make a phone call one day. Jason, that was a good 3 or 4 hour phone call. And it was the first of many. And those conversations continue. But at some point, I remember I went down for a research weekend with Jason, and he said, by the way, we're going to Skype with James Waldo today. And James had been, I mean, again, James Waldo's one of these unique people, being, a professional geologist. He was going out collecting samples of things and sending them in a controlled manner to Jason and I to be able to do tests on in our own facility. And so he and I are sitting there Skyping with James, testing soil for any kind of magnetic anomalies, things like this. We can get into more about why we were doing that and why that's interesting. But the long story short, again, this kind of is the reason that we came together, an interest in ancient mysteries, cataclysms, climate change, archaeology, what archaeology has to say about that, the peopling of the Americas, and again, what this all says about North American history. There does seem to be sort of a dark age that we went through around 12,000, 13,000 years ago. And modern archaeologists, geologists, climatologists, and other areas of science are still trying to really understand what happened. But our interests go well beyond that. That's just the crux that kind of brought us all together.
Yeah, I think there's a University of Kansas study that has come out about this, the possibility of a comet impact, which, is what Randall Carlson has been saying for years and years. So it seems like there's becoming a little bit of an acceptance that this theory is coming out. And I know you guys have seen this because I've, followed you guys on Facebook. You guys have been posting a lot about it.
That's true.
Yeah, well, it's one of those topics that kind of, it started as planting the seed of an idea several years ago, and now that's beginning to grow into fruition. So we're seeing a lot more research being dedicated to this subject, a lot more science being applied to it as well. And the most recent paper is just sort of looking at the biomass burning, which is another indicator of an impact. Of course, you have the platinum anomaly, the microspherules, and there's various other indicators on that Clovis layer of some type of impact 12,900 years ago. There's a lot of other evidence that's been gathered that has yet to be released that the Seven Ages team is privy to right now that we're really not able to discuss at this point, but we will as time moves forward throughout 2018. But yes, there's more evidence coming. You will see more papers being published on this, that I can assure you. And what's coming out so far, I think is rather than discussing it in broad terms, what you're really beginning to see from the science is very specific indicators that are helping to paint a larger picture. And that's what you're seeing every time one of these papers gets released.
And please allow me to add also, and James, if you wanted to jump in, or if Adam, you had another question, I'll be brief, but I do want to point out, often you'll hear, especially among fringe groups and things like this, people will go on podcast programs like this, and you'll hear them drop those keywords. Well, there's more information that we have, but we can't talk about it right now. So let's just dispel any kind of questions about that kind of a thing. When we say that we aren't talking about certain things that are known in the scientific community, that's because, and I can speak specifically about Jason and I, we had a conversation with Dr. James Kennett late last year. He's a very well-respected geologist who has studied this issue, this period in history for a long time. He and others in the community, Dr. Albert Goodyear, there are a lot of fine folks who are involved. They often will communicate with one another, and through our different correspondences in that area of interest, geology, I guess there's some paleontology involved too, but mostly archaeology and geology. Again, there has been a cumulative effort to search for information that doesn't necessarily prove that a comet impact happened, like everybody's talking about right now in the news this week, but more so I think they've been trying to find good evidence that disproves it, which is why the consensus opinion for years has been that thermohaline circulation disruptions, which were probably a natural process of deglaciation coming out of the last ice age, was the likely reason for the re-entry into a short ice age before we entered the Holocene. But again, there appears to be forthcoming more and more evidence. The recent paper with the biomass burning on a large scale, that's one evidence of this, something that actually happened, either an impact, something that would have caused, again, the actual fire, the actual widespread burning. There's been a lot of discussion about looking for such things as a terrestrial impact site. Again, what we know from having discussed this with a number of people in the field is that more information forthcoming will clarify all of the, again, hypotheses that are already well accepted, at least among the comet researchers, that some sort of an impact occurred. The point is, what we're waiting on is proper peer review of that kind of information, not somebody claiming that they've got a slide with an alien mummy on it or something ridiculous like that, and they're just going to sit on the information. Again, there's a very distinct difference between people saying, well, we know something, but, we're waiting for the right time to tell. It's nothing that we have or that we know. It's what we're waiting on the scientific community to put to a proper peer review process and go through a proper publication process so that it can be presented in a scientific way to the community. But again, just to paraphrase what Jason's saying, I do feel that there will be vindication for those who have long maintained that an impact is the likely causal agent here. I was very skeptical of that, as Jason knows, for a very long time. Through our conversations, correspondences, and our own field research over time, I think I've come to feel that very strongly there will be vindication for the comet hypothesis and impact hypothesis in relation to the Younger Dryas.
Yeah, I feel that way. I feel that way as well. Let's talk briefly about the name 7 Ages, what that means.
That's a really good question, by the way, because there have been others who have asked about that and expressed some curiosity about it. It comes from Shakespeare, but it's also indicative of a number of things. There's also a concept from antiquity, the 6 ages of man, but sometimes also referred to as the 7 ages of man. And really that concept, the 7 ages of man, which Shakespeare also referred to, all the world's a stage and we are merely players. That is something that had been borrowed really throughout antiquity in various iterations in literature. 7's a lucky number for me too, and I just liked the name. And when I had been trying to come up with different ideas for what we would call this, I was working very closely with Jason. James and I were, I'm sure James, we were corresponding at that point, but I don't think that we were sitting down saying, we're all going to put this team of researchers and be very science-minded. We didn't know what it would be at that point, but I remember nightly conversations with Jason. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? We must have gone for weeks through hundreds of different names. And the one that we settled on was 7 Ages because we liked the Shakespearean reference. We liked the concept borrowed from antiquity. Again, I think there were a lot of things about it that we liked, and that's what we chose.
It's definitely hard to find a name that fits.
These days with web properties and marketing and all these kind of things, it's no big mystery. It comes down to 3 simple factors. Does the name mean something to you? Mm-hmm. Does the name, is it something that there's a domain available for, and that's not to demystify it. But again, I know that Jason especially can speak to sharing in that laborious process of trying to come up with a name that said something to all of us. But I think that, and the lads here would agree, I think it's something that we have grown into very much. And as Jason especially will tell you, 7 Ages in its own way over the last year, make of this what you will, but it almost seemed in a synchromystical way to kind of manifest itself.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good name. When I first heard it, I thought it might have had something to do with different periods of archaeological history or something like that. But
Well, it certainly does, but
yeah,
one of the other things about it is it's just kind of a cool name. So as this thing's taken on a life of its own, Micah said we've grown into it in a way, but in another way, it's sort of absorbed us. It's sort of like this thing's taken on a life of its own, and sort of, in some ways, we've sort of been just along for the ride. I think these guys would agree with me on that.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, yeah, very much so. It's more so than us creating it. It really has created us. And I know that sounds kind of hokey or whatever, but once we really started working on it, it just began to essentially manifest itself. It's like this 7 Ages project is going to happen because everything is falling in proper order. And once we made that sort of epic journey north to all those archaeological sites, which we can get into if you'd like, that's when it really, I think, woke everybody up on the team. And we came back and we were like, what just happened? I mean, it literally took 3 or 4 days to kind of soak it in and be like, wow, like what exactly just happened to us? Because it was pretty phenomenal.
And I knew immediately what happened. I was sitting there thinking, even during the drive back, going to, thinking to myself, I'm not going to be able to answer any more of Adam's phone calls because I've insured for myself for the next 6 months more work than I can handle. But, some things in life are worth getting the shovel out and digging for, which is why we've hashtagged our own hashtag dig deeper.
Yeah. And I definitely want to talk about some of the digs that you're involved in, some of these different sites. But I think it's important for the audience and for us too. I wanted to ask you guys about, kind of go over kind of like the different periods that archaeologists, historians, what have you, that they divide Native American culture into. Who wants to take that one?
Well, yeah, sure. So there's a rough timeline, and this is one of those things that you can go to 10 different sources and get 10 different approximate dates, but they're pretty much generalized. So of course you have what's known as the Paleo period. All right, so when we refer to the Paleo period, or when we're talking about Clovis people, something along those lines, we're referring to about 12,900 years ago and back.
Okay.
So we have the Clovis people, here in a large, well, not large, but a sizable number in North America. And then we have what we refer to as pre-Clovis. So pre-Clovis is...
And just to say that Clovis refers to the place that these particular types of arrowheads were found. Clovis, New Mexico.
Well, yeah, that's referring to where the name comes from. But
right.
Clovis should be thought of more as a culture rather than
gotcha.
A particular time period.
Okay.
So when we say Clovis, think of it as a culture. So a group of people who are known for the fluted point that they created. So the Clovis point itself, the projectile point, is extremely unique in many ways because of the fluting, and a fluting is essentially a groove that starts on both sides, or it can be on one side, but generally when we're talking Clovis, it's a groove that goes from the base of the point anywhere from halfway to 3/4 up the point, and it's a deep groove on either side. So that's what they're known for, and it's considered to be high technology at the time, or because it's so difficult to create. It's even by modern standards, a modern day flint knappers, which is the art of creating projectile points. It's it's extremely difficult to pull that off. So they're recognized for that, for being a unique culture who had the ability to create these high technology lithics. So when we say Clovis, we're talking about that culture. And then the term pre-Clovis is generally referring to anyone who seems to be present in the North America continent prior to the arrival of what we consider to be the Clovis culture. And that's when we really get into the mystery of exactly how many people were here, who were those people, where did they come from, what portions of the country did they occupy, and what was the daily life like for those people, and how far back into antiquity do they go. And that's when we start discussing sites like Monteverde down in South America. You start discussing the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, the Topper site in South Carolina. While you do find that Clovis layer at places like Topper, you do also have a vast presence of what's known as pre-Clovis. And then, so we go pre-Clovis and then Clovis. And then we get into whatever happened around 12,900, which seemed to have a significant impact on the Clovis people. Not necessarily killing all of them off, but definitely impacting the culture to a great degree. Immediately following that, on the other side of whatever happened 12,900 years ago, you get into what's known as the early Archaic, and you have what's called a transitional Paleo time period there. So we're coming out of the Paleo times, and that's reflected in the lithic assemblages. So we're beginning to see these projectile points change. We're beginning to see tool-assisted fluting rather than the typical way that the Clovis were doing it without a tool assisting. So things are beginning to change, and the way we recognize these different time periods are through stratified archaeological sites. So
Sure.
if you get a really good stratified archaeological site, it's like a layer cake. And when you dig down, you can sometimes find things that are carbon datable, just different things that indicate a time period. So next we get into the early Archaic, then the middle Archaic, then the late Archaic. And the Archaic period, both early, middle, and late, is the longest time period. It's over thousands and thousands of years. And then we get into the woodland period, and that's when you start to see things like the Hopewell culture. Early part of that, you see the Adena culture, different keywords like that of different people that we see.
The mound builders.
Mississippian period.
Okay.
So the Mississippian period was what was kind of going on in this country right up into the point of contact with, Spanish explorers, conquistadors, De Soto, all those fellows. So we were at the Mississippian period when they first made contact.
So
that's a rough outline of the period. So pre-Clovis, Clovis, early Archaic, middle Archaic, late Archaic, woodland, Mississippian, and then historic.
So the woodland period is where most of the mounds were built, like the Serpent Mound, Cahokia, all those places.
So that's really when we start to see the advent of less hunter-gatherer and more agricultural, more city-centered, more religious complexes, things like that begin to develop with the mound building cultures of the Ohio Valley, and that pushes right on up into the Mississippian time period. The mound culture really beginning, most people agree with the Adena culture. They sort of kick that whole thing off, and then you get into the Fort Ancient culture, which built on that. The Hopewell, who made places like, the Seep Earthworks and the Newark Earthworks, as well as Mound City. And it just kind of grows into the larger Mississippian sites, like the one Micah just visited down in Georgia, the Okmulgee site. So yeah, it just gets bigger and bigger with the Mississippian culture. And then upon contact, once they're exposed to the diseases and all those factors, they begin to fall off. So.
Yeah, where did the Etowah Indian mounds, where they fall into the woodland, I guess, that time period?
Beginning then, yeah.
Okay. And that's roughly around 1000 AD, something like that? Or maybe a little earlier.
No. You can go back a little bit further than that, generally speaking. Like I said, if you're looking at the Adena mounds, so you're looking at maybe 3,000 years ago up, moving forward. And then, as we get closer to 2,000, 1,000, you begin to start to see, or 1,000 was when you really start to see the bigger your Cahokias and all those type places are building up, and that carries on over up into contact with the historic period.
Okay.
So with contact with Spanish conquistadors.
Okay. Yeah, primarily like in the south, as you mentioned, like De Soto, and then in the southwest Coronado and all that. Yeah. So what's the earliest date that's given for the settlement of North America?
Well, I guess there's some dispute about that, isn't there?
Right.
I was going to say that's a
What's the official line now as it stands?
Well, okay, let me preface this and then I'll throw it over to the guys here. There was a recent article, I believe, in the National Post, which had been, again, it had been really a taking political issue with a Canadian Broadcasting Corporation documentary, which featured Dennis Stanford from the Smithsonian. I don't want to get into that whole debate because that was having to do with a controversial theory known as the Solutrean Hypotheis. But at one point in the article, it says that the majority of scientists agree that the human occupation in North America, occurred around 14,000 years ago. And 14,000 years ago being pushed back about 1,000 years earlier than the previous 13,000 year, benchmark, which had at one time been the Clovis arrival. It was long held that Clovis, or again, what Jason so eloquently described as the Clovis culture, because again, keep in mind, we don't know if this is a diverse group of, or several different groups of people who utilized a similar technology, i.e. the fluted lithic blade, or if it was one particular group that shared this technology, one cultural group. Again, this is something that is not agreed upon by archaeologists as to what exactly was representative in terms of demographics and everything at that time period. But what we do know is that for the longest time, Clovis was, again, the benchmark in terms of arrival in North America. The whispers, you might say, of pre-Clovis, to borrow another term that Jason used there, go back to really, I would say, early 1970s, 1972, 1973, at a site in North America that we visited. The team and we went to the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter in Washington County, Pennsylvania. It was in 1972, primarily in 1973, and by that time, radiocarbon dates had been published for the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter that showed earlier than Clovis occupation at this rock shelter, a re-entrant. And we can talk about the geology of that site in a second. James can term that better than I can. But the point you want to know is that after all of this, again, at Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, what we determined was that the conservative date for the earliest habitations at that site was 16,000 years. And that is not even taking into consideration the aforementioned site in Chile, Monte Verde, which goes back and shows evidence of human habitation as early as 35,000 or so, 33,000 years ago, I think. Two different actual locations at that archaeological site there near Puerto Montt, Chile. So the point that
it's a long way down from Alaska to Chile.
It certainly is, and of course this raises a number of questions in terms of, had people been migrating from a southerly route and coming northward? Had people been coming across, from the Bering Strait area, but had they been using watercraft, sailing vessels of some kind, and sailing along the coasts, and would that have brought them further south? Had some of them gone inland? It's probably all of the above, in truth. But the point that needs to be driven home is that, again, Monte Verde, although it was discovered, I believe, in 1975, excavations began there in 1976 under Tom Dillahay, it was the first site that offered indisputable evidence of a pre-Clovis habitation in the Americas, and one that went back, again, tens of thousands of years before Clovis. But as far as North American archaeology, one of the longest periods of human habitation at any given site anywhere has been the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter. So when the National Post talks about 14,000 years ago and that this being a consensus in terms of a period that scientists agree upon as being the entry date of humans in North America, that's simply not correct. And it goes to show again that often people gloss over these things in the modern media. They will latch onto an idea that they consider to be a consensus scientific attitude or idea, and they don't actually know the science themselves. I've seen Scientific American doing this a lot recently in terms of discussing the megafaunal overkill hypothesis. There are many people who take decades-old ideas of things like the Clovis being the first people to arrive, the Clovis killing all the megafauna, and these kind of things. These are simply not ideas that are supported by modern North American archaeologists. So to come back to your question, and then I'll hand it over to the lads here, 16,000 years ago, I would say would be North American early occupation, but there are some disputed sites like Bluefish Cave. No, I'm sorry. Bluefish Caves is not disputed. As of this last year, it's been actually well known for years. Bluefish Caves, actually, though, there was a paper that came out this year that absolutely indisputably said that, I think around 25,000 years ago, there's evidence of human habitation. When I meant to say disputed sites, I meant to say Topper in South Carolina, which is a very interesting site. We're very interested in it. There are radiocarbon dates there that are suggestive of 20, 30, maybe even as much as 50,000 years.
Really?
Of age. Yeah. But that is a site that remains controversial. So let me be clear about that. There are plenty of sites like that. Calico Hill may be one of those. We could name others, but the point is that, again, it is no longer contested that the Clovis, or rather that there were people here before the Clovis boundary. That is an idea that was overturned a long time ago, and it's sad when you still see people in modern academician groups trying to act as though those decades-old ideas, which have been long overturned, are still the consensus opinion.
Like Michael Shermer?
Well, yes, we have to mention Michael Shermer. Michael Shermer appeared on the Joe Rogan podcast. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm attacking Michael Shermer, because as far as a skeptic, he carries himself in a very respectable way. He's friendly and approachable. I appreciate that in anybody who's trying to speak for science. But what Michael Shermer did when he went on the Joe Rogan podcast is he tried to refer to Monte Verde and called it Mesa Verde. He called that an anomaly and said, where are all the sites between Monte Verde and Clovis? He says Monte Verde is just an anomaly. Well, there are plenty of sites, including Meadowcroft Rock Shelter that the team and I have been to, plenty of sites that exist in terms of temporal relationships between Monte Verde and Clovis. And the fact that he didn't know that and yet tried to defend the point, I think, really illustrates the problem. Sure, it may not be his job, since he's not an archaeologist, to know these things, but if he's going to engage in a debate with people who are considered fringe theorists like Graham Hancock and who's that Randall Carlson guy, but they actually know the science better than he does, and he's still trying to argue it with them. That is a real problem. So I'm not trying to, and I don't think that James or Jason, and I don't think any of us are trying to drive home an argument for fringe ideas. We want acceptance of good, scientifically indisputable ideas that nonetheless some mainstream academicians continue to try and dispute. If our aim and objective and foremost, and we need to make sure that what people go out there to try and find is that accepted truth, not what somebody decades ago was trying to say was true, and it's an idea that's been overturned long ago.
Yeah. So what Micah was talking about just a few minutes ago with the rock shelter, just to elaborate on that a little bit, that's a naturally formed thing where you have like a overhang of very resistant rock over beds of rock that are less resistant. So over time that weathers away, and it makes a nice shelter for somebody to stay in. One of the other things that you don't hear talked about very often, but I'm sure geologists probably think about it, is we've only got evidence of habitation going back so many years, earliest maybe 30, 50,000 years in some places, and maybe further back in South America. But there's no geologic reason why the continent couldn't have been habitated much earlier than that, because all of the conditions that existed when the known migrations came over existed 100,000 years ago, and even going back further than that. And that's because the last ice age lasted about 100,000 years. So like right now we're in an interglacial period, and those things last 10 or 12,000 years. We're at about 11,000, pushing 12,000 years on this interglacial. These things usually come to an end sometime about now. Before the previous ice age, which lasted about 100,000 years, there was an interglacial that was similar to this one, and before that, another 100,000 year long ice age. So my point is those conditions existed. So if there were people that were in those areas that could have capitalized on that geologic condition to be able to come to North America, they probably would have done it, because the reasons that the people that we know about did were valid even in those times. So,
right. Yeah. People could have been here a long, long time ago.
Yeah.
Many different, through many different means.
It doesn't make it impossible.
Yeah.
It doesn't even make it unlikely. We just don't have evidence for it. And I've long felt like since the end of the last ice age, since we know that sea levels rose probably an average of about 400 feet globally, a lot of that evidence is lost just to the oceans. So
Yeah.
and a point I was thinking of earlier, while I'm still thinking about it, is the evidence for this possible impact at the Younger Dryas, this drama that we're seeing playing out in science right now, where where the evidence is accruing and there's the battle back and forth about the hypothesis. It wasn't so long ago that we were doing the same thing in science with the extinction of the dinosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous period. When I was a kid, nobody knew what killed the dinosaurs. It was a mystery.
James, when I was a kid, we didn't know that.
Yeah, it was until the Chicxulub crater was found, and then there was the at what they call the KT boundaries, the Cretaceous tertiary boundary. There was evidence for an impact. So, some people recognized that and argued for that, and then there were people that argued against it, just like we have today. So, until that crater was found, and we had the technology to find that crater, there was no real smoking gun for it. But once it was found, it was pretty much all over with, but with the crying, with the skeptics of that, and now it's basically an accepted fact in science. So
the asteroid killed the dinosaurs. Yeah.
Correct. Right. But there was a time we didn't know. We had no idea what killed the dinosaurs. There were all kinds of speculations about it. And it's the same thing with the megafaunal extinctions in North America and globally with like man-centric tigers and all of these what killed these? Well, it was the Paleo Indians just, stabbed them all to death with spears and arrows, which sort of it sounds good, but it really doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. So, but what makes sense to kill all of these animals off is a global catastrophe, or at least in the northern hemisphere, that works. But we didn't have any evidence for it. Well, guess what? We're starting to get some evidence for it, and it's not a closed case yet, but we're down to the last couple of nails in the coffin, I think.
Hey, listen, let me just interject too. What James said is so important and fundamental to this entire argument. I think that a lot of people look at this as being like the scientists are either right or wrong, and the fringe people are either right or wrong, and it's like these two warring factions having some sort of future city street fight of some kind. The way that science works is, again, we go with what the most likely story or scenario is based on the evidence. And if a better hypothesis comes forward and there is demonstrable evidence later that actually uproots or overturns an older theory and presents a better theory on down the road that suggests this as a causal agent in terms of explaining a wide array of different phenomena, then science will go toward that. But it relies on that evidence. And science isn't trying so much as to prove this or prove that, as to disprove this or that. And again, you have to have good evidence to do that. And so that's why James has been saying that, again, ideas like the megafaunal kill-offs rather than die-outs via natural causes, in other words, human predation, that had been for some time an accepted opinion. And of course, among some academicians, they still try to, dare I say, no pun intended, drive that point home. But the thing is that there is, I think, a better explanation. It has been a cumulative effort, however, over the last couple of decades to present the accumulation of that data, which is showing more and more likelihood for there being some sort of catastrophic event that occurred. And the evidence of this, I'll also point out, and this is coming back to something that Jason touched on earlier, is in regard to the Younger Dryas, similar to what we determined with regard to the Cretaceous tertiary boundary recognized in coincidence with the extinction of the dinosaurs. And that, of course, involves a peak in geological strata where there is a prevalence of rare earth element. I think it had been iridium in relation to the Cretaceous tertiary boundary. We found some say that there's an iridium anomaly that can be found in certain strata in relation to the Younger Dryas too, but the big one, and there was a scientific paper that some friends and colleagues of ours even contributed to last year, which talked about the discovery of a platinum spike, a platinum anomaly that has been found coinciding with a lot of Clovis sites. So you think about the evidence of the scorching, the ammonium content that spikes in the geochemical tests, which seems to suggest widespread burning. This is what the recent study's talking about. There have been numerous studies, and I'm certain there'll be more forthcoming that talk about evidence of an actual impact site. We have the platinum anomaly. We have evidence of all kinds of other geological data and other things, climate proxy data. It is more and more, I think, pointing toward the scientific reality of a cataclysm probably induced via an impact similar to what killed the dinosaurs.
Are there any sites that are just off the coast? Because as James said, when the Ice Age ended, that water filled in. So like the Chesapeake Bay, those places off the coast of Florida. Is there anything that people are looking at, that any of these sites that are right off the coastline?
Well, there's ongoing research for that right now. Actually, on the first episode of Seven Ages Audio Journal, we talked to J.M. Adavasio, who is known for his work at the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter. He's also known for his contributions to the Vero beach sites down in Florida, as well as the Wendover Bog people down in Florida. Something that he's not as known for, that he's currently working on, is trying to map and discover some of these offshore sites. The difficulty with this is, it's extremely expensive, obviously, to have the watercraft, to have the scientists, and everything that you need. Underwater excavations are dangerous, and it requires a huge budget, which is always a problem with archaeological sites, and is funding, as with just about anything. But you got to realize, many of these cases, the old coast, when we're talking about the Clovis people, was up to 100 miles further out than it is now. So we know that there's habitation sites out there, especially in places like the Chesapeake Bay that you mentioned, Adam. There's been scallop dredging boats there. They're scraping the bottom and pulling up scallops and clams and different things in that region. And for many, many years, they've been pulling up countless amounts of artifacts. And that leads into a whole nother discussion, because you may be familiar with the work of Dennis Stanford and Bruce Bradley with the Solutrean Hypothesis. Well, that's kind of the area that they've based this off of for the potential of what they believe to be Europeans coming across the ice sheets and settling in North America at some point, because some of the finds that have been discovered in that general region have a very distinct shape to them, known as the laurel leaf, which we normally associate with that Solutrean culture of Europe. And now, of course, that's extremely controversial. It's been battled over ever since it came out. But regardless of that, they're found there on a I wouldn't say regular basis, but over the years, there's been quite a few examples found. But other, early archaic paleo pieces have all been found in that region, because while it is now a flooded out area, a bay, if you will, and all those rivers, it wouldn't necessarily have been back then. So, tons of inundated sites all around the entire coast. There's not just in North America, but everywhere. They're finding more and more of these all the time. But as mapping gets better, as really depending on some big industries like the oil companies, they do a lot of bottom mapping in order to discover areas to dig, and a lot of times they're responsible for finding what could be archaeological sites, mammoth kill sites, all sorts of different things, completely by accident sometime. But they are using that technology, and hopefully, as that advances in coming years, we'll be able to locate some of these mammoth kill sites, or some of these potential habitation sites with a lot more accuracy. But right now, it is very expensive. And of course, we do have a shortage of archaeologists. We have a shortage of manpower to really get out and explore some of these sites with people that have the qualifications to do so in a professional and safe manner.
The Solutrean Hypothesis, since you brought this up, I do want to talk about this, because the first episode we did this year, I read this article. I don't know if you guys saw this. Probably should have sent it over to Micah. But it was for the Southern Poverty Law Center, SPLC.
Mm-hmm.
So they did this whole article, and a lot of it they talked about ancient aliens stuff and how ancient aliens has racist roots, but they actually talked about the Solutrean Hypothesis in that. And they talked about how Andrew Jackson was a proponent of this idea that there was whites that came over in antiquity and they were all killed off by the Indians. And they were actually pulling a lot of the research from one of Micah's favorites, Jason Colavito.
Now, who is that?
This is Southern Poverty Law Center that put this out. But
No, we don't know who he is.
yeah, but Colavito's, they were using a lot of Colavito's work on this stuff. And my point in reading this was that, if it seems like the whole Solutrean hypothesis has a lot of weight on it because of just there's all this tricky racial sensitivities about it. But my point on there was if it could be proven, without a doubt that people came over from Europe, then why is it? It just seems like it's beholden to our modern racial ideas and to the racial ideas of the 19th century. But there should be just if the science proves it, then that should be it. So I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that, this whole hypothesis.
I did see that article.
Okay.
I'll simply comment that the Solutrean hypothesis has been controversial for two reasons.
Right.
One of those reasons involves the fact that, again, if it is taken simply as a scientific proposition that there had been people from the Solutrean culture 15,000, 18,000, 20,000 years ago that came over from Europe and that they had settled parts of the Americas, we need good evidence in support of that. And in truth, there's very little in the way of genetic evidence that shows any kind of lasting European presence in Paleo-Indian America. That's simply the truth. What the science says is that, again, all the evidence genetically points back to Asia. Okay. Now, the Solutrean hypothesis, if we want to kind of water it down and say that rather than this being the origin of, for instance, the Clovis culture, and we want to say that Solutrean hunters came over and that they hunted along the northeastern coast, which, again, keeping in mind, like Jason was describing, that coastline was further out, again, with the recession of the actual coastline in relation to the glaciation period that we were in with the ice age. There was more accumulation of ice, i.e. frozen water along the polar regions, and thereby there was a lower sea level at that time, and the actual coasts extended further outward. So where the lithic evidence or the archaeological evidence for this Paleo or pre-Paleo Indian presence would have occurred, i.e. Solutreans hunting along the northeastern coast, it's underwater now. It would not have been at that time. And that's why what appears to be a lithic presence that some suggest to be Solutrean in origin has been dredged up off the Delmarva Peninsula, places like that. The idea that people came over and that they hunted, and yes, Dennis Stanford and Bruce Bradley co-authored a book called Across Atlantic Ice, which kind of takes that concept, that, again, decades, well, much more than decades, probably, old concept of the Solutrean hypothesis. Well, I should say of European contact with North America. Okay, the Solutrean hypothesis being one iteration of that. Stanford and Bradley build on that idea in a modern context and try to make an archaeological case based on lithic evidence for the Solutrean presence in the northeastern Americas. The problem is that, again, modern science still disputes that genetically. But to say that the Solutreans came over, hunted, and maybe they didn't stick around for very long, maybe they came over, they hunted, maybe some of those who made it this far died, or they went back, that's not that controversial. And I do think that there's plenty of evidence that supports that idea that people were making their way over that far across. In other words, making their way across from parts of Europe to North America. Now, people have tried to dispute it and say, well, there's no evidence that these people had any kind of boats, that they used any kind of watercraft. But the point you got to remember, I think the oldest boat ever discovered is around 8,700 years old. And 8,700 years old, in other words. This is because the technologies employed for watercraft are generally extremely perishable. Wood, flotation devices in the ancient world, wood, sealskin, things like this, they're perishable. They're not going to last the test of time like the lithic presence, i.e. stone. When you have stone tools, those will last the test of time, and that's why archaeologists rely on the stone tools to such a great degree that they do. And so when people make an argument against something like Solutreans coming across the Atlantic and hunting in parts of northeastern North America, and saying that, well, there's no evidence that they had boats, it's going to be extremely hard to find evidence of those extremely perishable technologies tens of thousands of years perhaps later. It's almost impossible that would occur unless there were extremely unique circumstances that led to the preservation of one of these watercraft. So that is a highly speculative idea, but it seems quite evidential that at some point in the ancient world, i.e. the colonization of Australia and things like this, that watercraft had to have been employed. So it's not a crazy idea. And again,
at some
J.M.
point, right.
Well, yes, and J.M. Adavasio, who we interviewed at the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, author of a wonderful book which everyone should read. It's called The Strangers in a New Land, What Archaeology Tells Us About the First Americans. He's written a number of great books. Any of them are worth reading, but that book, he addresses this, and he says there's this almost illogical aversion that some people have to the discussion about watercraft in the ancient world. So anyway, we could talk about that all night. I want to address the other issue, though, about why the Solutrean hypothesis is controversial. It doesn't just have to do with science and being able to prove that it happened. It also has to do with the fact that because it seems to entail Europeans arriving in North America prior to the groups that genetically are identified as being North American Indians of Asian descent and origin, it was an idea, the Solutrean hypothesis, that was sadly adopted by many in white nationalist circles. And yes, there is absolutely a racist component with that. And that's the problem. But to say that the Solutrean hypothesis is racist simply because it was adopted by groups who espouse ideologies of hatred, that is completely wrong. Unfortunately, the idea was taken, hijacked, and misappropriated. And the truth is, those Solutreans who would have come over, in ancient times, they would not have been white by the standards of Europeans as we recognize them today, which is, again, part of the fallacy of the logic employed by those who have used it to their means of trying to make the case that, well, there were Europeans that settled here first. When we look at, like, for instance, the debate about the mound builders in the 19th century, one of the big questions had been who built the mounds. And there were a number of instances where everything from crazy wild suppositions to even planting bogus artifacts in some of the Indian mounds that were suggestive of an Iberian or a Solutrean or other European kind of a presence. There were all kinds of strange things that were done so as to try and convince the scientific community that these could not have been built by the North American Indians. Also a racist idea. And that brings us around to ancient aliens. If you look at all of these things, the idea that ancient people couldn't have built the mounds, they couldn't have built structures like the pyramids, they couldn't have engaged in this incredible architecture of the ancient world. They had to have had help. Whether we're saying that Europeans came over and helped them, whether we're saying that it was aliens that touched down and did it with spaceships and levitation devices, the problem is we're taking away from these people and their natural ingenuity, their capabilities, their technology, and their understanding of that technology and their capabilities. We take that away from them when we say that they couldn't have done it themselves and that they had to have help. The reality is the overwhelming archaeological evidence supports that indeed the Native American Indians built the mounds, that yes, the Egyptians built the pyramids, although there may still be some questions about the period during which the pyramids were built, and I won't get into that right now. I mean that simply in the sense that there are some lingering questions archaeologically about that, but that's, again, not strictly relevant to this conversation. As far as North America goes, we know that the Native American presence can account for the phenomena we have observed, but that has been a long disputed thing in American culture. And really, again, that question kind of originated around the time of the birth of archaeology and its proliferation as a science in North America, which is a fascinating bit of history unto itself. So again, the Solutrean hypothesis, it came along a bit after that, but it is not in itself inherently racist. It's just unfortunate that it is an idea that some of racist ideology have ascribed to because it was a beneficial argument for them. That is unfortunate, but the fact that people try to make it out as though to believe that this happened is racist, that is not an accurate portrayal of what the archaeological evidence shows.
Well, kind of the language of that article that Southern Poverty Law Center put out was almost as if to say, well, just this hypothesis was used by these white supremacists, so therefore we just need to just totally throw it out. And that's wrong, I think.
I think it is wrong if there is evidence that supports the idea. Even, and again, I don't see enough evidence personally that suggests that Solutreans come over and that they inhabited North America and that they actually, they stayed here, that they interbred with whoever may have been here at that time or whoever came along thereafter, and that there's a genetic trail that goes back to ancient times that shows a lineage. Now, it is possible that some stayed and that some perhaps did meet people from elsewhere. I mean, it's not impossible by any means, but again, what we're still looking for is evidence of that. But to say that people came over from Europe and that they were hunting along the northeastern United States at the time, but North American coast, to say that that alone is a racist concept, That is intellectual dishonesty, first of all. And when people try to say something like that, what they're actually doing is they're trying to marginalize the idea because they disagree with it, or it conflicts with an existing ideology or idea that they have accepted, would rather promote. And see, that's the issue that we seem to be facing in America these days. And I'll get off my soapbox here in a moment because I've got my two good fellas here present as well. But I mean, the problem that we face these days seems to be that if I disagree with what somebody says, then I'm going to marginalize it and make the idea out to be evil and associate it with someone who is evil. Again, here's a great example of somebody who's fallen into this recently, Professor Jordan Peterson, okay, the Canadian professor. I'm not going to get into his politics or anything like that, but I'm going to say that this is a man who is a professor who is identified more as a liberal himself, but he's being called a fascist, a racist. He has been called a misogynist, likened to Hitler, and he's also been called the de facto leader of the conservative movement, based on the fact that he disagrees with certain policies in the Canadian government and education system. And again, it's a sad time in which we're living where if you actually, what he did was he was challenging this idea of radical political correctness. If we have become a society that is so politically correct that certain ideas, even like the Solutrean Hypothesis, there may be some modicum of archaeological evidence in support of it, but the whole idea has to be thrown out because a few right-wing fringe wackos have adopted the idea to their own, ideals and whatever they're trying to prove to everybody. Again, that's missing the point entirely. And this is, to me, a cultural problem that needs to be addressed. I'll get off the soapbox now.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure.
I want to thank my guys here for allowing me to take a moment to speak to that point because it's important and it needs to be addressed as a social issue.
Yeah.
You're a force of nature, son.
Thank you, sir.
It is kind of sad. I had a guest, just a little bit off topic here, but I had a guest that said that he got most of his news from RT, and somebody basically told me that on Facebook that they weren't going to listen anymore because they said that we just were on the fence and we really needed to come out and declare for the left-hand side, and it's just silly.
So hold on now, Adam, because somebody came on your show and said that they got their news from RT, it's guilt by association, and therefore you can no longer be listened to as a credible source of information. Not that you were credible to begin with because of the kinds of things that you address.
Yeah, and this same guest that said he got his news from RT also believes that there are bases on the moon and that he can live to the age of 300. But
of course, because you had that guest, you are no longer acceptable as a commentator or podcaster.
Right.
Your voice no longer matters. You've been marginalized to the fringe as well. I get it. Okay.
Right.
I see. Oh, that makes sense.
Somebody could write a PhD thesis on the psychology or the sociological issues with this type of behavior.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Not gonna be, but I think it can be done. I try to avoid people if I can.
So I
hear that.
What are some of the sites that you guys have been to recently? What's kind of like your most in-depth site that you guys have been going to?
Well, okay, we've been visiting. I'm trying to see where everybody wants to go here. Some of the sites that we've visited include, as we've mentioned, the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, but we've discussed that a fair amount. Again, it's a period of long human habitation in North America. But some other notable sites that we visited recently, as Jason had pointed out earlier, we spent some time up in Ohio. We visited the Mound City Complex, which is a Hopewell complex. Very interesting due to the fact that it, like so many others in the immediate area, seemed to bear a celestial kind of a relationship or in terms of their construction. These sites, these mound complexes were built in relationship with celestial phenomena, the rising or the setting of the sun on the summer equinox, things along these lines. It just goes to show that, again, the builders of the mounds, indisputably Native Americans, had an incredible knowledge of celestial mechanics and things along these lines. One place I think that we all definitely agree was just breathtaking, and I'd love to get the guys' feelings about this particular location, was the Serpent Mound. And on one of the episodes of the 7 Ages audio journal, because if you aren't already aware, Jason mentioned it already, but we do a podcast, the three of us here, which is called the 7 Ages Audio Journal. It's available at 7ages.org, our website. On the most recent episode, we featured an interview with Dr. Brad Lepper of the Ohio History Connection, where we got into not only discussing the Serpent Mound, but a lot of different aspects of Ohio archaeology. And again, Jason, maybe you can speak to Dr. Lepper's points about the construction of the Serpent Mound, because there's been as much debate about who built that and during which period it was built. Also, I think he really made a very, I was compelled by his case and who he believes was built or was involved in the construction of the mound. But again, Jason, I'll turn it over to you. It was just an incredible interview with Dr. Lepper.
Yeah, it absolutely was. And it's that type of person that we're trying to bring to the podcast. We're reaching out and finding different guests. We're finding experts in their field. And I just want to take a moment before I talk about the Serpent Mound to kind of let everyone know who's listening. We're not just doing archaeology. I mean, we all have a passion for that, but we're also covering, various science topics, culture, a lot of things in modern culture, a lot of things in the past, how they connect together. So we're looking at, science, history, archaeology, any type of science discipline. So each time you listen, you'll get, a little bit of each one of those things, but we do kind of have a passion for archaeology because there's so much there to learn. And I think as we move forward, people will begin to realize just how much history there really is in North America. It's not all in Egypt. It's not all in Greece. It's not all across Europe. Those places are great. They're fantastic. But there's plenty of places right here in the United States that you can go see for yourself. And you probably had no idea that they were there. And so it's kind of part of our goal and part of our movement to highlight some of those places so that the average person can go get to see something truly spectacular that's right there in their own neighborhood, in their own town, that maybe they didn't even have any idea about. And honestly, Dr. Lepper speaks to that in episode 4 of the 7 Ages audio journal, where he talks about many people in Ohio have no idea that a lot of these things are actually man-made. They just think they're grassy hills. They don't really even begin to understand the history. Serpent Mound. The Serpent Mound is something that if it's within driving distance of your home, it is absolutely worth going to see. There's nothing else like that. It is the world's biggest serpent effigy. And it's truly spectacular. It's something I think everybody should see at some point. It should definitely be on that bucket list.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Jason, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's disputed, again, who built this thing. There's a lot of symbology. There's a lot of potential celestial alignments and just different things that are found there. But some argue for it being an Edina mound. Others argue for it being the later Fort Ancient culture because the serpent seemed to be much more prevalent in the Fort Ancient iconography than we found with the Edina. However, we get controversial carbon datings from different parts of the mound, from the different mounds that are separate from the serpent itself that are found on the property. Some are Edina, some are Fort Ancient. So there's an ongoing controversy. We could talk for an hour about that, but just know that even today, in 2018, it's still disputed over whether it truly is an Edina site or a Fort Ancient site, or if it was a continuation of one such site. So maybe one culture began to develop it. As the other culture came along, they just built onto it, so on and so forth. But, I would say it's, without a doubt, it's probably one of the top 5 archaeological draws within the United States, something that everybody should see. So being where it's located, it's pretty simple to get there from most places, kind of right in the middle of the country. So most people should get out there to try to see it if they can.
Yeah, Serpent Mound. Again, one of the fascinating things about it is it was not recognized until we actually had satellites that helped us orient directional coordinates apart from, pure magnetic compasses. It wasn't immediately recognized that the setting of the sun on the day of the summer solstice aligns perfectly with the open mouth of the serpent. And the reason for this is because that, as James pointed out to us while we were there at the site, the Serpent Mound was built in the actual the actual bed of a giant impact crater, an ancient impact crater, and there are
really,
there are magnetic anomalies still present there today as a result of this. Once we get satellites in orbit and we're able to utilize directional orientations apart from pure magnetic directional readings, we began to realize that, hey, you know what? Actually, our directional coordinates here at the Serpent Mound are slightly off. That's true north, and that would mean that the setting of the sun on the day of the solstice perfectly aligns. And they begin to pick up on all these sorts of things. There have been other claims that have been made. We absolutely cannot rule out that there are lunar alignments and things like this, but that is somewhat still disputed. It's absolutely solid that, again, the solstices and the Serpent Mound and its construction, there's definitely a correlation there, as Dr. Lepper speaks about on the podcast. Again, arguably one of the most incredible interviews, but he's not the only archaeologist that we have interviewed, and we are by no means only going to be, as Jason said, interviewing archaeologists on that podcast. So do check out the shows that we've got available right now, but that particular interview stands out. And again, you're going to hear stuff about the Serpent Mound that you never knew, and this coming from a credentialed academic, I think in his own right, truly a gentleman and a scholar, if not a sage, perhaps. Dr. Lepper, he's a wonderful guy. He's got a Carl Sagan-esque kind of a persona, and we just enjoyed that about him.
A great interview, it really was.
I'm gonna have to get out there to check that thing out sometime. It's only like 5 hours away from us here in Nashville.
It's worth the trip. You know, when we got out there and got out of the car, we'd only been out a couple of minutes, and there was just this huge, like bone vibrating boom. You know, it was like one of those mysterious booms, Micah. I was sitting there thinking you were talking about this thing. I was like, we ought to start referring to it as the boom snake.
You know, by the way, that's a good point. Okay, James, you brought up something that we were so taken in by the archaeological importance of the site that we don't ever talk about the fact that the minute we got out of the car, there was this weird phenomena. I looked on the maps to see where the nearest munitions depot been, that they might have been engaging in a controlled explosion of something that would not. I can't say that it wouldn't have been, but it couldn't have been close enough. But the fact that it was further away might account for an atmospheric refraction. Long story short, ladies and gentlemen at home, there was a mystery boom that occurred. We got out of the car when we pull up at the parking lot there at the Serpent Mound. I said, guys, wait for a minute. I want to change into a different T-shirt here. Put on my T-shirt, my jacket and stuff, and we're getting out of the car. And this, I mean, like he described it, this, you felt it in your chest. It was so loud and so deep. And it had to have really been something. It must have left quite an impact on us. What happened after that I so often forget to bring up the fact that it happened. This coming from a guy who owns the website mysterybooms.com, a scientific website devoted to trying to understand via USGS data and other kinds of data the scientific causes for mystery booms. We experienced one right there at the Serpent Mound of all places, which was just in keeping with all the weirdness that happened while the three of us were out there on the road back in October.
The spirits have been waiting for the 7 Ages Research Group to get to the Serpent Mound, and it just all happened all at once. You know, we're in Tennessee, guys, and what's around us it would be interesting for people to see?
Well, actually, our question to you is what's around you, because we want to come and check it out. And Adam, you got to take us around, right?
Yeah. Well, there are a few things, but an hour south of here, there is the Old Stone Fort, which is really interesting. I'm not sure what the date of it is. It's basically, they call it a fort. I mean, it's just a really kind of like an enclosure, and they think that it was used as like a ritual area. There's also the Etowah Indian Mounds, which is closer to Atlanta. That's a fascinating place. Just these 3 large Indian mounds. I tried to take Luke over there one time, but it was closed. Real interesting. Yeah, it's fascinating. Again, just like an old ritual area. And you know, where I'm from, Chattanooga, there's a lot there. Moccasin Bend is an old area of human habitation. People probably lived there for tens of thousands of years, is what they're estimating. And an interesting thing about Moccasin Bend, they built I-24 around Lookout Mountain, around the bend of the Tennessee River. And my dad told me that when they built I-24 there, this is like the 50s or 60s, they actually took dirt and ground from the other side of the river, which is Moccasin Bend. Okay, this is the interstate system that did this, and they went and shored up around the area of Lookout Mountain so they could build the interstate. Well, while they were demolishing that ground, they said that there was like skeletons being pulled out, skeletons falling into the river. There was no archaeological dig there at the time, so they just kind of destroyed whatever was there.
This is in the days before cultural resource management.
Yeah. And they had actually now they've actually got some excavations going on there. A little further up the river from there, they built the Chattanooga River Park in like the 1980s. And actually, one of my anthropology professors was part of that dig, and they were pulling burials out of that area. So there's a rich culture. There's a lot of rich stuff around Chattanooga as well. So there's lots of interesting sites around. But as far as like well-preserved, state-maintained Etowah Indian mounds and, of course, Old Stone Fort here are really interesting places to see.
Those are fascinating. I don't want to throw Jason to the lions, but I do know for a fact that he's fascinated with Tennessee, the state, and its archaeology, and knows a lot about the various things that are going on over there too. Jason, did you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, well, Tennessee is, the whole state, but especially eastern Tennessee, is just rife with Native American culture. I mean, it's actually one of the best places in the country for finding artifacts. There's been countless amounts of artifacts pulled out of there, everything from, farmers to exactly what you just described, major scale construction projects along a river. I mean, that's, the rivers were the interstate for the native people of America. So that's how they, go back to that watercraft discussion that we talked about earlier. Watercraft was an easier means of trying to get around than necessarily walking everywhere. So, I mean, those river bends would have been habitation zones. Oftentimes when they find villages and burials and different archaeological complexes and sites, that's exactly where you find it, right there off of a river. So, I mean, Eastern Tennessee has long been known from everything from paleo right on up to the Mississippian. I personally own in my collection quite a few artifacts that are from that region, from that general area, counties that border right there along the mountains. So, I personally have probably, I don't even know how many, but quite a few artifacts in my personal collections that came out of there in the 1950s and 60s.
Over at Etowah, they do have a little museum, and they have some of these statues that they pulled out of the ground there. They have one of them. They took the rest of them over to Smithsonian.
Mm-hmm. Are these like effigies or?
Yeah. They're very ornate. I think you could, if you do a Google search for them, I think you could probably find them. But they're fascinating. Probably one of the. It's a powerful place to go to. Just stand up on top of one and just realize that people have been here for centuries and centuries.
Well, Adam, adding to that, the Etowah Mounds are, you said, close to Atlanta. Where are they again? In what part of Georgia?
They are close to Cartersville, Georgia.
Gotcha.
Georgia. So it's almost about a halfway point between Chattanooga and Atlanta.
I got you. Yeah, as the guys know, I was recently at the Okmulgee site, which is down there. I mean, I would say that it's a national monument, but the actual property that the monument encompasses takes up maybe as much as a tenth, maybe even an eighth of the general immediate Macon, Georgia metro. It's very large. And those mounds, I mean, we had spent so much time at various mound sites, Serpent Mound, Mound City. We visited actually what is designated as one of the, if not the largest actual Adena mound anywhere in the United States, which is the Grave Creek Mound. That was a fascinating place too that we've been to among the sites that Seven Ages has visited. But when I went to Okmulgee last weekend with Dakota Waddell, we and Dakota, of course, is a longtime friend of mine. He also he has a degree in history, but he works as a musician like I do from time to time. He works a lot more as a musician than I do. I kind of hung my hat up on that to pursue this kind of thing more steadily. Okmulgee, those are some of the largest mounds I've ever seen. And the Temple Mound, the Great Temple Mound, is 55 feet tall. Again, the square footage at the base might be as much as 18,000 feet. in terms of the area it covers. It's very large, built up onto a swamp. And there is, again, a habitation that goes all the way back to the Paleo-Indian period. It's just hard to tell whether or not there were Paleo-Indian hunters, i.e. Clovis, because they did find one large fluted projectile there in the middle 1930s. It's hard to tell whether there was a consistent habitation site there during that Paleo-Indian period, or they just happened to find evidence of lithics where they had been hunting, moving through that area. But we definitely know that by the time that the Mississippian culture, of course, comes into play, that they were there, they were settled there, and the mounds were constructed during that period. Absolutely awe-inspiring. And like you talk about the Etowah mounds, to climb to the top of one of those mounds, to stand there, to look out over the world, and to see the same view that people hundreds and perhaps thousands of years ago, in some cases when you go to some of these places, to see the world from their perspective and to know the world as they knew it, even for just a moment. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah.
There's nothing like that feeling, nothing like that sense of going to those places, being there. And I try every time to maintain a certain mindfulness, to feel the essence of what it was when those people constructed those sites and what it was like for them to be there, what it was like for them to live there. Another side, I got to say that the Seven Ages team and I, really, I think we all took this one in like that. And it may not immediately appear to be as impressive a site as some that we've discussed here, but Flint Ridge. Okay, Flint Ridge is an ancient lithic quarry, one of two that Jason and I visited together, but we've all three been to another one also called the Morrow Mountain State Park. When you go to these quarries where the ancient people in America were extracting stone from the earth, and this is what they used to create the lithics. And we collect these tools, we find them in plowed fields these days or in the bottoms of stream beds, but when we take them and we hold them and we turn them in our hands, some people look at those and they go, oh, look at that neat arrowhead. I know that I speak for all three of us, Jason and James and I. We don't hold one of those in our hand without thinking, my God, this was formed out of stone, raw earthen material, thousands of years ago by somebody. And this person made this because it was not just a way of life, but this lithic, this stone tool was the key to their survival. They lived and they died by that stone. And that, again, when you go out there and you experience that for yourself, Flint Ridge is one of these sites where chert was extracted directly from the ground, and you go there and there's a beautiful little path. It's a nice little trail, a nature trail, and people are out there walking their dogs and doing stuff like that. And the three of us are down on our hands and knees, literally moving our hands through the dirt, marveling. You're not allowed to take any of it away from there. It's actually a federal offense, I believe. And so we're looking, it's kind of a look, you can touch it, but you're just not supposed to take the stone away. But to be there and to be able to see all this beautiful multicolored, rainbow colored flint, and to know you see the huge heaps of earth where they had dug holes to extract the chert from the ground over periods of thousands of years. God almighty, it will blow your mind when you go there and you take in and you think, my God, this is a place that for thousands of years people came here because their lives literally depended on it. It's incredible.
Yeah. It's amazing to think about it, to get that context of your place in history, Well, thank you guys so much. I mean, this has been very fascinating. I've really enjoyed this. Rob, Luke, was there anything that you guys wanted to ask about?
No, I just wanted to commend you guys on the amount of content you guys have put up over the past 4 to 5 weeks. You guys have obviously put a lot of work into this, and I love what you're doing. And it makes it, the fact that we haven't been able to talk to Micah in months, we totally get it now, and it's worthwhile. So thanks for doing what you're doing.
Hey, well, it's our pleasure, but we got to make up for lost time, and I do need to come see you guys. I owe you some time, honestly, because as true friends of mine. And again, I hope you guys will get to meet. Adam, you got to meet Jason. We went and saw Iron Maiden together. It was great.
That's right. We missed Ghost, but we saw Iron Maiden.
Don't remind me. Miss Ghost. How did that even happen? So there's a make good that's got to be done right there. But I want you guys to meet James Waldo too. Again,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
There's absolutely distinctly a brotherhood and a familial feeling when we're out together. And I hope maybe that 7 Ages, we can make our way over there toward Nashville, Chattanooga, and spend some time with you guys. You take us out, and keep in mind, the different periods in Native American history in America, those are not the entire focus of Seven Ages. If you head over to sevenages.org, you'll see that, I mean, we've got articles that Jason has written about great white sharks and his paleontological interests and things. James has done some great articles. Our most viewed article right now has to do with the calendar of deep time that James wrote about geology. Well, I loved that article too. I love all the articles that the guys are writing. And again, as de facto editor of the website, I get to read all of them. So I'm well aware of what my buddies are writing. And there's some really great content over there. We do some news and some features and things about some current events stuff too. But we're trying not to just do what a lot of websites do and just feature the same stories that everybody else is rewriting and doing. There's a lot of original content that goes much deeper. For instance, there's an article I wrote about World War II that involves Ian Fleming and his work as assistant to the director of Maxwell Knight, who at the time was head of MI5, and they're trying to tap Aleister Crowley to help them in the bid against the Nazi Germany. So
somehow in a show that we do about archaeology, Crowley is going to come up. Like, he just pops his ugly head in there all the time, Rob.
Every single episode.
Well, again, all areas of history is what I'm saying. Seven Ages, if you look at the actual website, it says history, archaeology, science, culture. We want to talk with Anthony Bourdain one of these days. So I know that there's so much rich culture and history that your state and the locality right around you guys over there in Nashville offers. We're looking forward to coming and seeing you too.
James, where are you located at?
Oh, I'm in Savannah, Georgia.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So we're all fairly right
now. I'm maybe about 3 miles straight line distance to the Atlantic Ocean.
Okay. So we're all fairly close to each other. I mean,
regionally, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, you guys are going to have to come out here to Tennessee.
We would love to.
Yep.
Oh, I love it out there. I'm actually from west of the Mississippi over in the Little Rock area.
Okay.
And I'm a transplant down here to Savannah, but we travel back that way, 3 or 4 times a year through that area.
Oh, and if you guys don't mind, by the way, we do have one kind of pertinent announcement to make, depending on when the podcast airs. Seven Ages is going to be at a lithic artifact show in Greenville, North Carolina. And that's going to be coming up this weekend. So for those who may hear this in time, that's going to be this Saturday, February the 10th, a trade show in Greenville, North Carolina. Jason, the official name of that trade show is what again?
It's actually just called the Greenville Artifact Show.
Okay.
But yeah, it's going to be at the Holiday Inn Resort Center, our conference center there in Greenville, North Carolina, not South Carolina. And that's going to be on February 10th. And we should be there till about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Just, meet with people and doing some interviews and just kind of hanging out for the day. So yeah, if you happen to be in the Greenville, North Carolina area, feel free to stop by and say hi.
And we will have a table there with our logo, with some audio visuals, some cards, and some pamphlets and things like that. And of course, we're always available to talk. We're going to be hoping to do some interviews with people there on site. And keep in mind, if you're out there listening, especially if you're somewhere in the Southeast, and you know of an artifact trade show coming up that you think would be of interest to Seven Ages, you can email us. If you head over to the website, sevenages.org, you'll find the ways to contact us. But I mean, our emails are very simple. Micah at sevenages.org, Jason at sevenages.org, James at sevenages.org. Any of those emails will reach us. But yeah, let us know where you are, what's of interest to you, what you might think that we'd like to come see, or if you have a story or a site or an area of history that you want to talk about and share with us. And of course, if there's a show, a trade show or something like that you think would be good for us to come and visit, we'll look into that too. We love to get out there. We're going to be doing it this weekend, and we're not just going to be going to a trade show. We're going to be doing some field work and stuff too. When we do it, we usually go for several days at a time and keep ourselves busy. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you guys.
Excellent.
Thanks, guys. And I also wanted to say the website's fairly nicely formatted. It's real easy to view. It's great on mobile devices. Like, it's laid out real convenient, and there's a lot of great content there. So just want to commend you guys on that as well.
Thank you, Brother Rob. Thank you, man.
Yeah, man, we appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thanks for having us on. It's been fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, guys. Stay on the line for us, gentlemen, and we will be right back to close out the show on Conspirinormal.
Yeah, man. I think I want to go be a Mississippian Indian and carve some
mounds.
Some lewd artifacts and mounds. Yeah, I like mounds.
Yeah, apparently you've been drawing a picture over here. What are your pieces of art?
Yeah, it's a little Mississippian dude banging like a tribal chick, and there's a like skin covered hut in the background.
We need to sell those. We need to sell your artwork, man.
No,
$100
like I said, I'm going to turn them into wallpapers. They're going to go on the Patreon account. If y'all want them, you can put them on your computer.
Would you like some of Luke's pornographic wallpapers?
Yes. I'm sure you do.
I don't think this is like appropriate for the.
It doesn't matter. Even if you don't want to use them as wallpapers, if you just want to see them, they'll be there. They're waiting for you.
Maybe you could just draw some little or digitally put some little sensor bars on here.
Yeah. I can do that.
As if no one will really know what's going on or anything like that. Yeah. So what'd you guys think of that?
Oh, that's great, man. I really like what they're doing. I like that Micah's put together a team of people that are, licensed, like good at what they do, very knowledgeable at what they do, and they're going around to sites and they're actually like digging really deep into this stuff.
Yeah. Instead of speculating, they're actually going out and doing.
Yeah, they've obviously. I mean, we know that like Micah disappeared from us months ago, so we know that they've been like working super hard on this stuff and. They're not just out there. They're not just on the internet like grabbing stuff and regurgitating stuff. They're coming up with good content. Good like research, like original, validatable stuff. And it's definitely worth looking at. The website like alone, it's only been up for like a month or something like that, and it's got tons of blog posts. It got all these audio podcasts. It's just great. Yeah,
Mike has added yet another podcast to his repertoire, which is other than Grayling Report and Middle Theory, which are both I highly recommend. But this one I highly recommend as well because it's got a good feel to it, and I think that they've definitely talking about the archaeological stuff, but also some like weird historical mysteries. They were talking about. A little section about Boston Corbett, who was the guy who assassinated John Wilkes Booth.
Yeah, and there's some random social like pop culture-y stuff too. As well. But there's a lot of really deep. The geological stuff is really fascinating, and
they did a whole thing about Charles Manson.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Which I listened to that yesterday, which was really interesting. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing more from those guys. So,
absolutely.
This is it. Last of the 100s.
Wow. So we got like a big one coming up next.
Apparently we do.
What are we going to do?
I think we have some people coming into the studio.
Really?
Or they may have already been here.
Wow.
I don't know. You never know with the effects of time travel. Sweet. What can happen?
I hope I don't lose that file.
Yeah, that would not be good.
Yeah, I'm probably going to back that up.
You got to back it up. So, tell everybody about Patreon. I don't know if Luke's going to sing this time, but
no, Luke has a broken molar and refuses to go to the dentist.
He's falling apart. You need to do it just like the ancients did it, man. Just take a rock and just smash it on out of there.
I mean, I did take a rock at the lake and just like file my tooth down when it was stabbing into my cheek one time. So.
Well, there you go.
That's
folks.
a good way to do it.
I am my own dentist.
If you want to help promote our podcast and help Luke get dental care, you can do so at patreon.com/Conspirinormal. There's several tiers. We have a lot of bonus episodes. We post them up monthly when we can, mostly monthly. There's wallpapers. We've got T-shirts. There's various tiers you can subscribe to. If you don't want to do a subscription, if you don't want something monthly coming out of your account, we totally understand. You can go to our website and do a one-time contribution at conspirinormal.com. And if money is a little tight and you still want to support us, just a 5-star review on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you listen is huge for us. We absolutely love those. We try to read the new positive ones whenever we can. They're all positive lately, and we love you guys for that. So those are different ways you can contribute. And again, we love you all.
Yes, absolutely. And apparently I'm seeing something about Elon Musk launched a car into orbit.
Really?
Or something.
I love that guy.
Your hero.
He is my hero.
He's going to replace us all with robots.
That's
but
fine.
He'll still be your hero.
The robots will do a better job.
Yeah, maybe so. All right, guys. Thank you so much. And we're going to be back for our episode 200 extravaganza on Conspirinormal.